Gotcha.
So welcome everyone to this edition of the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon, and I welcome chocolate fans of all flavors, no matter where you might be checking in around the world. Today's special guest is Brian Graham of Fruition Chocolate up in the Hudson River Valley of New York City. And New York, not New York City. I'm sorry for making that conflation. But if you don't know his work, you don't know Brian as a person, you're in for an extra special treat today. And we'll be back right after we play the intro video. New for today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Chocolate Life Live. I'm really happy to have as my guest today, Brian Graham of Fruition Chocolate. Brian, as I'm thinking about this, I'm trying to remember, and I don't remember, and I don't know if you did, the circumstances under which we first met. I mean, I think I became aware of your work before we had a chance, but is this something that you remember? Can you help jog my memory?
I actually don't remember. I think it may have just been proximity. You may have just been upstate for a day or something and stopped by, or there may have been a mutual friend involved. I honestly I don't remember. I feel like I've known you since we started the business.
And when was that? When did Fruition first open its doors and start selling product?
So we leased our space in early 2011, and then we spent most of that year working on getting it outfitted and figuring some things out, and then we opened the door to customers in October of 2011.
So wow, no, over a decade now. It's quite an achievement, especially over the last couple of years. I mean, how has COVID had an effect on your business? I mean, one of the things that I know about it is that I was very pleasantly surprised about the number of companies that have not just survived, but have thrived through it. That somehow the discipline of rethinking their business and trying to stay open has, in fact, energized an entire sector of the chocolate community.
I feel incredibly fortunate that we were able to not only survive but also thrive. It forced us to really rethink a lot of things and to figure out ways that we could be really agile in what we wanted to focus on with the business. So around March, April of 2020, we decided to close our retail store in Woodstock. We had a small, very small retail store that we were thinking about closing anyway, but we used that as partially an excuse to close that store down, and then just bring everything back under one roof and start thinking about where we wanted to focus and what we wanted to do. So we switched entirely to a to-go window. We stopped letting customers in the door. We put a lot of effort into online sales, especially because wholesale dropped because many stores that were carrying our products also closed down, and we're also trying to figure out what they needed to do to survive. So we spent that time really focusing on what our strong suits were, and slowly during the rest of 2020 rebuilding our staff. We went from our highest of 16 employees down to 2, and then several months later we started bringing some people back and rebuilding the team, and despite all of that, we had a record year.
That's absolutely amazing. And again, I think that one of the things that pleasantly surprised me is that thoughtful companies, who many of whom were in the midst of expansion plans. I mean, as I recall correctly, you might have more than doubled the size of your facility in 2019. I'm trying to remember exactly when that expansion happened. Going from the original space and re-outfitting at a number of different times.
Yeah. But, 18, 19. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in that case, but what I want to do is I want to take a quick break and shout out to everybody who's joining us so far. If you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or in Facebooks, you have your comments. And if there's a question you'd like to ask Brian about the business, if you have a comment, please put it into the chat. What I'll have an opportunity is to get that up on the screen and we can remark on it. And even if you just want to say where you're tuning in from today, what part of the world you're in, I'll get you up on screen and do a quick shout out and thank everybody for their participation today. Brian, one of the things that I think is really interesting about your story is that unlike, I think, most other specialty chocolate makers, you have a background in culinary and then formal culinary education. So I understand that includes working in restaurants in and around the Woodstock area when you were in your mid-teens. And then deciding to go to the Culinary Institute of America. So can you tell me what about, being a teenager in the Woodstock area, being involved in food, the decision to move across the river, right, and go to school, and what were the influences there that caused you eventually to say, yeah, I think I want to open up a business making chocolate from scratch?
Sure. I'm honestly one of those lucky kids that kind of always knew what they wanted to do. Growing up around here and being aware of the existence of the Culinary Institute of America for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wanted to eventually go there. I knew I wanted to work in food. I just had a lot of my influences were my mother and my grandmother. Spending time like learning how to cook and bake. And when I was a teenager, I was placed at a restaurant in Woodstock called the Bear Cafe through a community mentoring program through my high school. And I started working there in the kitchen, and then eventually spent some time downstairs in the bake shop with the pastry chef, and really fell in love with that. And I wound up working there until I was in my mid-20s, because at the time I couldn't really afford to attend the CIA. And then in my mid-20s, I was finally able to go to the CIA. It was a dream come true, and did the 2-year associate's degree program in baking and pastry arts. And it was during that time that I took the class that would ultimately change my course and change my life. And it was the chocolates and confections class with Peter Grueling. And I really fell in love with chocolate and the idea of working with chocolate. And just through my experiences there, and sort of in some ways pestering him into learning more about the actual chocolate making process. We made a batch of chocolate together, an extremely crude batch of chocolate. It was before small tabletop melangeurs were really commonplace. So we sort of threw together using a pan coater and some stainless steel ball bearings, a very crude ball mill. Got some cocoa nibs from the storeroom that tasted like cardboard. No discernible origin, no information at all. Sort of threw things together and made this crude chocolate. And it was objectively poor quality chocolate, but it was my poor quality chocolate, and it was the first batch that I got to make. And from there it was like,
of it, yeah.
And from there it was that like I knew what I wanted to do.
Right. So I don't know if you knew this part of my story, but for a while I was selling Cluizel and Dumore, so for Pierrick Chouard in New York City. And I had the opportunity to go to CIA and sit in on one of these classes that Peter was giving. And we actually worked from cocoa beans, right? And took things, roasted the cocoa beans, everybody is hand shelling them, and throwing them into these melangers, which looked like one of those DIY confectionery pans. So it's 2 stainless steel bowls that are paper clipped together. I believe that was technology that he got from Terry Richardson of Richardson Research. Terry being involved at UC Davis.
That's right.
And so, if you can, really, really quickly, one of the things that really, really intrigued me about the program at the CIA, I'm fortunate to have known Peter Gruling. I've given demonstrations. I've taken classes. For example, Jean-Pierre Vibau did a master class over the course of a weekend, and I had an opportunity to participate in that. Very, very fortunate. And also up in the Poughkeepsie area, the influence of Francisco Migoya, who's now working for Modernist Cuisine as the editor of, among other things, the bakery book and the bread book. It's just really, really quite fascinating. What strikes me as interesting is that the CIA, and I believe that this is the case still on the Hyde Park campus, as well as Greystone, where Stephen Durfee is heading the program there, that chocolate and chocolate confectionery is still only a 2-week concentration out of 2 years. And was that your experience back then? So when you said take a class, was it literally just this, let's take 2 weeks out from watching yeast rise slowly to making chocolate?
Yeah, exactly. At the time, and I'm not sure how the CIA is structured right now, but at the time it was a 3-week class in chocolates and confections, and that covered all kinds of sugar work, confections, and chocolate work.
Yeah. So even though chocolate is a very, very important ingredient in all types of confectionery, the actual time spent, and this was true, I think, at the Institute of Culinary Education until Mike Lasconis became involved with the project. The actual amount of time devoted to what chocolate is, how it's made, the intricacies of it as an ingredient and how to appreciate it as an ingredient was very, very different from here's a recipe and it says use semi-sweet chocolate, go figure out what that means. I want to interrupt if I can, Brian. We have an interesting question from somebody who's watching. So this is from Melissa, who asks, if there was a platform to get fine/craft chocolate in front of employees to teach them about chocolate makers' bean to bar process, what would the comparison be in the fine wine craft cheese worlds? And does this exist already? That's for you, Brian. I mean, if you've got
that's a fine question. I mean, is there a platform? Not that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
In front of employees, in front of whose employees?
Well, so in general, if somebody is coming into a bean to bar chocolate factory, right? So
Sure.
You are transforming beans into chocolate, right, in Shokan, New York, and you're hiring somebody. When they come to you, for example, they've trained at CIA for 2 years. Chances are their experience making chocolate from cocoa beans is literally zero in most cases.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the question is, if I go to work for if I went to work for an artisan cheesemaker, I mean, there are places where I can go to learn cheesemaking. People think about, learning how to, I'm not going to become the head winemaker at a vineyard, probably unless I've spent a couple of years at UC Davis or someplace in particular.
Sure.
I suppose the question is, the answer, from my perspective, Melissa, is you can take a class here and there from École Chocolat. There's a class coming up at Penn State University, which is 4 days long. There is a German organization called ZDS, which gives classes on a regular basis. But when you think about a platform for education all the way around, they don't exist that I am aware of, right? And there is no sort of professional organization. This is not something that the FCIA does. It's not something that I'm aware of that the FCCI do either. And I'm kind of wondering, Brian, there's such a DIY approach to everything. Do you think there's actually enough support that if there were formal education and this kind of stuff where you could go and for a relatively inexpensive amount of money, learn the basics? I mean, do you think there's enough interest in something like that around?
Well, there sure is now. I mean, you would know better than I do how many craft chocolate makers there are in the United States, and there are many more than when we started Fruition. At the time, I mean, you mentioned the Penn State course that Alan McClure is teaching, and sadly, I'm not going to be around because I would love to go down and take that.
Right.
I mean, even though I've been doing this for quite a while now, I still feel like I know nothing, and I'm learning, and I'm trying to learn, and I love seeing how other makers do things, and I mean, and a chance to learn from Alan especially would be spectacular. At the time when we were just getting started and I was just interested in this, there were certainly far fewer options for learning. There was, of course, Chocolate Alchemy. That was a huge resource and still is. And the Chocolate Life, the forums on the Chocolate Life, and some other places, but a lot of it was trial and error, and just experimentation, and sort of making things up as I go along.
So Melissa follows up with another question. So I'm glad you think we answered your question for you. It's always, our goal to do that. Would such a platform, so when you say this type of platform, such a platform, I think you mean bring value to the chocolate industry. So Melissa says she recently went to an FSAA meeting where we discussed how the chocolate industry is about 15 years behind coffee and wine. So would this type of platform be of value? Brian, what are your thoughts? I mean, would it make sense? I mean, so, right now, so you mentioned the Chocolate Life as it was, when I first started out, 2008, 2010. So it's formative in terms of your starting your business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the companion platform, not the companion platform, but between the Chocolate Life and what John Nancy was doing in Chocolate Alchemy. This is before the rise of forums like the Bean to Bar Chocolate Chat and Facebook, before Well Tempered on Facebook. And then you also have 70%.com. So what you have, in the early 2008 timeframe is you have 3 different online communities, each of which are focused on a different aspect of the puzzle. But so, in that respect, it's been really, really good. So we're providing complementary, but not competitive kinds of information. But the question is were there to be sort of a formal school, right? And that, was not beholden to a specific production methodology, right? So it didn't have an ideological, it said, well, craft chocolate is this, and so this is the only way to do real craft chocolate, right? Which I see as a problem. Do you see from your experience talking with other chocolate makers who might be just starting out, or might have been in the business for quite some time, refresher courses and all this kind of stuff? What is your sense in terms of the value? Because I am baffled that a professional organization like the FCIA, after more than a dozen years in its existence, hasn't been able to figure out a way to do this, or even decide if it's an important aspect of industry growth.
I don't know how many people there are who are looking to start craft chocolate companies right now. So I really couldn't speak to what the demand is.
Okay.
I do know that we've been approached many times by aspiring chocolate makers who have somehow found our chocolate and like it enough to ask us if I could, I don't do consulting, but I'm happy to have conversations with people. And I've experienced with like a very specific set of equipment and techniques and how we make our chocolate. So I can only help as much as I can help from my own experiences. I don't know necessarily the benefits of one type of process to the other. I think education is always a good thing. We should seek it out more. We should not be, just buying a mélangeoire and saying I'm a chocolate maker now. I think we should seek out information and guidance from other chocolate makers who we admire. And I think there, depending on what the demand is, I think there certainly could be some sort of formal education program.
So my feeling is that the number of chocolate makers in the world small chocolate makers. And I'm going to use the word specialty because I like the connection to specialty coffee as a definition as opposed to fine or craft, is a lot greater than most people think. I mean, I just look at my Instagram feed and I find out how many new businesses are starting up. And, 6 months ago, would have said there are over 2,000 makers in the world, right? And my guess is that we're probably, getting close to 2,500 small makers around the world. Anything up to, Dandelion is one of the largest makers. And so depending upon which year you're talking about, somewhere between 100 and 200 metric tons. I mean, I don't know if you'd include Bonan in that category, but they're about 300 metric tons. So if you talk about things smaller than that, I mean, the number of makers is exploding in my experience. But I want to jump really, really quickly and say thank you to Leslie, right? Who wants to thank you, Brian, for the chocolate that you make, some of your favorites. And thanks to me, Leslie, I will take it. I appreciate it. I started, Clubhouse over a year ago because I was stuck in my house, stuck in my apartment, and wanted a way to reach out to people. And so for me, still with travel limited in many, many respects, the ability to just, visit various parts of the world and talk with new colleagues and old friends has just been a real boon to me for my state of mind. Number one, just being able to get out and engage like this has been really, 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 really important to me. So thanks for recognizing that and your support. So Brian, when you started off, you were in small melangers, and as I recall, you had an old Vollrath 3-sheet, just conventional convection oven for a roaster.
It was 4 sheets, but yeah.
It was okay. Wow, 4 sheets, right?
Yes. All analog controls. Temperature fluctuations, 50 degrees in either direction Fahrenheit, and a couple small melangeurs, and then a cocoa town, then 2, then 3 cocoa towns, and then over the years we've scaled up a fair amount.
Right. So one of the things that I want people to really understand and appreciate when it comes to scaling up is there are lots of approaches to doing so. So you have, for example, the Mass Brothers approach, which is let's just buy 20 of these things and put them in a big room, or a more modern approach, and this is one which Manoa and French Broad and other people are taking, or go into fairly large ball mill situations. But the ball mills that we have today weren't available to you as you were moving out of the melangers into universals. And you bought McIntyre brand universals at the time. And I think you shared with me, that you were producing more chocolate in less time and with significant energy savings, which I thought was really, really important.
Yeah, if I may, more chocolate in less time and better chocolate. Okay. Much far superior chocolate.
Okay. Yes, good to know. And I agree with that assessment. But there seems to be sort of an almost religious, it's sort of like the Mac versus Windows, where stone on stone is authentic, and if you're not using stone on stone and you're moving into any sort of metal on metal kind of thing, it's like you've betrayed your sacred oath as a craft chocolate maker somehow.
Betraying the sacred oath is also, adding vanilla or adding extra cocoa butter. Like, God forbid we do that.
You add cocoa butter. Right.
Sure.
Yeah, my mantra is make your life easy. I mean, if you've got a low-fat bean, all you're doing is you're making your life really, really difficult if you're not adding cocoa butter. We could talk about, vanilla in the industry is considered to be a masking aroma, right? It's designed to cover up defects, or if you have slight differences after you've done a blend and you've done a roast, and we need to add vanilla in it to make sure it's exactly the same as last time. So it can be used in ways which are sort of counter to some of the ideas about what a specialty chocolate might be. But one of the things that I don't see anybody have done is let's think about vanilla as an origin product, not just the origin of the beans. Right. And so let's create 3 different bars. And this is sort of a segue into one of your new collections. So I'm framing it this way. Could we create different bars which might have a Madagascar planifolia vanilla, a Mexican vanilla, and then an Indonesian Tahitian vanilla, where we're thinking about the origin of the vanilla, not the origin of the cocoa bean. So there are ways to use it creatively, but we're sort of focused on this notion of 2-ingredient chocolate, and it's the purest form, and it's the only form, and it's the authentic form. Like, we cut ourselves off creatively from a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like why put those restrictions on ourselves? And that's one of the reasons we have everything, from our version of a white chocolate all the way up to a 100% dark, and we have chocolates that are single origin, just cacao and sugar. We have some that have added cocoa butter. We decided never to limit ourselves in what we offer.
So I think creatively the goal is not to be dogmatic, right? That we're not making creative decisions based on dogma. What we're doing is we're saying, what are the creative opportunities with what it is that I have in front of me and what I'm going to do with them. I want to jump into that conversation next, because I think that's really, really important. And it's one of the, so for a number of years, people have said to me, who are your, top 5 favorite chocolate makers in North America? And you've been on the top of that list since very beginning. And I think if you said, give me 10 top chocolate makers in North America that Fruition would throw into the top 5, would just float naturally. I mean, Soma is up there. Art Pollard, when he is on his A game, for example, would be up there. But I think that one of the things that separates you from many people is that from the very beginning, you've not just thought of yourself as a bean to bar chocolate maker, but I'm a chocolate maker. What can I do with the chocolate that I make? And I got to tell you, I was really disappointed when I opened up the package that you sent me yesterday, and there was this thing that was wrapped up, and it wasn't bourbon caramel. So I was like, no, it's a gel pack. Anyway, but what I want to say is, before we do that, we have a comment from Namib. Hey guys, starting chocolate maker here. Like to discuss about roasting cocoa. How can I contact Brian if he's willing to share? If I can jump, Brian, if he's not following you on Instagram, so you can do, is it Taste Fruition on Instagram or Fruition? So
Fruition Chocolate on Instagram.
So follow Fruition Chocolate on Instagram and then do a DM. And so rather than publishing an email address or a phone number here, I would contact that way and follow them just going that way. And then from Mark at Blue Spruce in Colorado, following up on Nami's contest, what roasting method do you use now? Can you spend a few minutes discussing your roasting process? And I think it would be really shocking to people to find out that I think you're still in a convection oven, correct?
Yes. In fact, I have you to thank for this, Clay. You turned me on to the Unox combi ovens several years ago. So when we were scaling up, when we needed something to upgrade from that that glorified toaster oven, we decided to go with that, and I love it. And we roast 6 full-size sheet pans at a time. And what I love about that type of oven is we can program in a roast curve, steam injection. So full humidity controls, fan controls, and once we have that figured out for a particular bean, for a particular chocolate, we can just push that button and it repeats itself. Whereas with the older style, we were constantly like reading temperatures, making adjustments on the fly, and so this way we have much more consistency, and it's it fits in our facility. Is it ideal for the amount of chocolate we're making? Probably not. But I like it. It's familiar to me. We can use it for other things. I mean, I baked some French macarons in it the other day. So I can do other things in it. It's not just a dedicated cacao roaster.
Yeah, it is something that I think that many small chocolate makers don't take into account. There is a sort of desire to go with some sort of drum roaster, but especially if you have limited space, the ability to think of your oven as a multitasker. So you can make more money in some respects turning your chocolate into brownies than you can selling it into bars, for example. And if you don't actually think about again, it's the, if I'm a bean to bar chocolate maker, chances are what I'm doing is I'm making beans. But if I'm a chocolate maker and asking the question, um, what can I make with my chocolate? Then looking at a convection oven as an alternative to two ovens, especially when budgets are tight and space is tight, makes an enormous amount of sense. So, here's an interesting, so you always started off in an oven. How difficult was it to take the roasting curves, profiles that you had from your tiny little Vollrath and move them into a much larger combi oven? I mean, was it a struggle, or, did you have it more or less, down from the very beginning?
Yeah, I mean, it was fairly intuitive, and it obviously took a little bit of trial and error, but it was an easy jump. I think it would have been a much more difficult leap had we been transitioning to a drum roaster or some other method. So it was actually less painful than you'd think.
So how much of, so there are two things about those ovens that I think they're, one of the reasons why I recommend them, and I'm sort of interested in your notion of is that they have what I think of as very fast recovery times. So once the oven is up to temperature, if you open up the door and you put your pans of beans into them, it comes back up to temperature very, very quickly. And so you can start, with the roasting process very quickly. Whereas with many drum roasters, you can get it to 350 Fahrenheit, drop in 35 kilos of beans. It's going to drop 150 degrees Fahrenheit like that. And it could take you a long time just to get back up to temperature. So number one, how does a fast recovery time help you? And now that you've been able to dial in a particular roast profile, I mean, how wonderful is it for you? I'm answering your question in advance.
Yeah.
To be able to just go pick a program
Yeah.
and walk away, and the machine will beep at you when it's done.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it saves a lot of time. I can do other things, or I when I'm roasting, it's usually one of my chocolate makers who's doing that. But yeah, no, it's a huge advantage.
Right. And then, of course, for those people who may not know, a combi oven is one that is plumbed with water, and you have the ability to inject steam into the oven during the baking cycle. And so what that means is you can inject a high humidity into the beginning of the roast cycle, which will, one, help puff the shell off the bean. And number two is, if there is any contamination with E. coli or salmonella or something like that, it will kill those bacteria very quickly. So, I mean, you can get drum roasters that do have water injection in them, right? It's not as common, but it's something to consider, is that you do have a more efficient microbial kill step if you can put moisture into the cavity during the roasting cycle. So Nabib comes back and says, Brian, do you use John Nancy's method? Can you explain how you roast and how you sort out problems in roasting? Now, so in 2 minutes or less, and even though it's a years-long conversation.
Could you explain what John Nancy's method is?
The way I sort of think John Nancy's method is that you roast it until it smells right. All right, that's how I sort of interpret what it is that's going on. Got it. Ed Seguin told me many years ago, if you can smell it, it's no longer in the beans. And so I advocate for a very, very different approach to determining when a bean is properly roasted. But how do you go sort about deciding when a bean is properly roasted, which is the short question?
Yeah. It's really, and this honestly would apply to like pretty much all of the steps, all of our chocolate making philosophy, which is we first try to make it taste good to ourselves, and we don't have focus groups. Our focus group is my staff, my team. And I work very closely with Chris, who's my head chocolate maker, who's been with me for 7 years now. He started as a CIA extern, went back to school, finished up, and then has been with me for. He's my absolute go-to right-hand person for all things chocolate making, and we communicate with each other in a way that we know what we're looking for, and we can get to that point. And it's usually So for instance, when we have a new variety of cacao that was sent to us as a sample or something we specifically sought out, we'll always start with sort of our baseline roast, and we call it our Oco roast. We use a lot of cacao from the Dominican Republic, from Oco Caribe, and we have our standard roast for that one. And that's always where we start, and we'll start with that roast, and then we'll taste it and we'll smell it and we'll talk about it, and then we'll adjust from there usually. So that's really how it all starts, and then we'll pass around. We'll go and grab everybody from the team and talk about it.
So let me ask another question about combi ovens, because people have reported this way. So if you have a drum roaster, right, and let's say you don't have a sample roaster, you don't have a roaster that is designed to roast 1 or 2 kilos at a time. You've got a 50-kilo roaster. You need to put 20, 25 kilos in that in order for it to be for the heat transfer characteristics to be anything like a full batch.
Sure.
So you have a 6-pan Unox. Can you put 1 pan in it, and even a partially filled pan, and get the same sort of roasting results out of it as if the oven were full?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I get pretty like a pretty accurate idea. It's not going to be exactly the same as if it was completely full, but we can get a good idea from there.
Okay. Which
Definitely.
is another reason to think about getting ovens. Again, heat transfer is different. Your profile of roasting is going to be different than if you are using a roaster where things tumble.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's just whatever works best for you. I mean, this is how our company started, with the little toaster oven up, and we slowly upgraded, and it's just what works for us. I really can't speak to alternatives because I don't have experience using them, to be honest. So I know what works for Fruition. So
well, and whatever it is that you're doing, it appears to work really, really well. So before we jump into the tasting component of it, and I want to say thank you very much for sending me these things.
You're welcome.
I got to say, the question I have is, right, I am a big fan of what I think of as your crack nuts. I mean, I wrote about that in the post for today.
Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know, crack nuts are corn nuts, which are enrobed in dark chocolate and then dusted with jalapeno powder. And so there's crunchy, salty, fatty, carb, chocolate, heat. And it's like a phenomenal where was do you recall you had an aha moment? You said, we got to do this, or are you a fan of corn nuts? What was that?
That I think at the time I didn't really have much experience with corn nuts, but I do know the origin of how that came to be. There was a really fantastic craft cocktail bar in Kingston, which is not far from where the shop is, and I used to live around the corner from this place, called the Stockade Tavern. And Clay, I know you've been there.
I've been there with Abby. Yeah.
Yeah. So we became friends with the owners, and we were talking about developing a bar snack, and it would be something that would hit all of those notes you described. So something salty, sweet, savory, spicy, and we came up with that. We came up with it primarily as just something that they could serve at the bar, and then it became a regular product of ours. Sadly, which you already know, we discontinued them because they just weren't, they weren't selling that great. And then also because it's something that we had since Fruition started, and to be honest, I was a little bit bored with them. So we temporarily discontinued them to think about like a way to revamp them. So so we will be bringing something like that back, but probably a blend of spices and chilies instead of just strictly jalapeno, and maybe different types of chocolate. But the crack nuts shall return, I promise.
And you have a big fan. I'm thinking chipotle right in there, or something like that. Chipotle powder, which is a mesquite smoked jalapeno for people who aren't aware. So it's a nod to its original origin. So, right. So one of the things that was in the box yesterday that you sent me are these. So these are miso maple almonds, and I made the mistake of opening it last night just to try them. It says on the back, "Enjoy by 8/2023." These are not going to last through 5/2022. I can tell you. These are almost as Moorish, and Moorish in a different kind of way than the crack nuts are. But I think what's interesting to me is that there are not a whole lot of American chocolate makers who are doing this combination of salty umami and chocolate. And this is where, we've got maple, which is a big thing in this part of New York. You're adding it to a milk chocolate, as I understand. And then you're dusting the finished enrobed almond in a miso powder. And so you have a little bit of salt. I mean, miso powder is not as salty as many miso pastes are. But then you've got this wonderful sort of umami, which, balances out the sweetness of the almond. And, I don't mind if everybody hears the crunch.
Yeah,
so where did the inspiration for this come from?
Those have been something that's been sort of bouncing around in the back of my head for a long time, and the exact inspiration of those flavors goes back a long time. A dear friend of mine that I went to culinary school with briefly owned a donut shop in Harlem called Dough Loco. And it was a really fantastic donut shop. And the first time I tasted this flavor combination was one of his donuts that was a miso maple glazed. And I loved that combination so much that I knew I wanted to use it somehow. In the past, I've made like a miso and maple marzipan. It's always just been a flavor combo that's just stuck with me. And I started panning those not too long ago, and we already had a maple milk chocolate. So it's a variation on our version of a classic milk chocolate. It's our brown butter milk chocolate. But we're just subbing cane sugar for maple sugar. Also a locally produced maple sugar, which is made just maybe 15 miles up the road from us. Mm-hmm. So then we had the maple component. We have these really great almonds, and then we freeze dried some white miso paste, made it into a powder. And it all came together. So you're tasting. That's the first batch. I mean, it was very small.
Yeah, I noticed that it is batch number 1, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to be like a souvenir can for the memorabilia, the Museum of Chocolate 40 years from now. It's like number 1.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to hear it's going to.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen. The next time I come up in business, you need to take anything which is on the shelf, which is available to it, and just hide it away. Otherwise, it's like I'm gonna take it all. And I was really happy to hear you say marzipan, because I think that marzipan is one of these traditional kinds of convections for which there is, other than sculpting it into funny little shapes, thinking about interesting flavors in marzipan is something that I wish there was a lot more creativity in. I mean, I can get this miso maple marzipan or this maple marzipan. It's like I'm going, oh yeah. This is very, very cool, and what you can do with that.
Yeah.
So what I want to do next is I want to talk about this collection of 4 bars you sent, which is called Origins of Peru. It's backwards for everybody because I got my camera flipped, so my left is my left. And there are 4 bars in here. There are 3 darks and a milk. And it's just fascinating to me because, you may or may not know, I've been doing this thing about transparency reports for the last couple of weeks. I'm going to do another one on Friday about connecting sustainability, ethics, and transparency to the notion of impact. And I think it's really interesting, looking at the back of these labels. So you talk about in the Marignon bar, people who will know where Marignon is, it's a location, right? But then you talk about who your sourcing partner is. You're buying these from Marignon Chocolate. Very, very cool. And you talk about the beans on the top. And then you have Piura, which is another region, right? Which I think is really cool. And then you also talk about who your sourcing partner is. And then you've got this other one called chuncho. But interestingly, chuncho is not a place; it's a type of bean. And so it's like, oh, that's really, really interesting, right? But you talk about who your sourcing partner is, and then you've got this blend sitting over here, which is the milk, and it sounds like, it's the chuncho, the pura. I don't know if it's the Gran Blanco, but Cajamarca is where Marañón is, right? And so, and it just says ethically sourced. It doesn't say who your sourcing partners are. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, I really, really like the fact that there's this level of detail on it, that who you're talking about. And sort of curious about, the decision-making process, about how particular names were chosen. And then we're going to get into the chocolate, right? Because I'm really, really excited to try the chuncho and then the pura and see how they are. I know that you worked with Chris Curtin on a Marañón Noe, I think it was.
The Noe bar, yeah.
And I've written about those in the past. So you and Dalia, you have this historic connection to Peru to begin with. All fascinating discussions about sourcing decisions and how you choose to talk about the bars on the labels. So hopefully there's not so much there you can't chew it off and start coming up with answers.
Yeah. I mean, so Dali and I have spent a fair amount of time in Peru, and in fact, you and I have traveled in Peru a little bit, and it's a place that's like very dear to our hearts, and this is something that we've wanted to put together for a long time, since we've been using the Marañón cacao for quite a while, several years. Both as a single origin dark, two ingredient dark, and also as a 68% dark milk, a high percentage milk chocolate. So that's really the only bar in the set that we have a fair amount of previous experience with. And then we've been given some samples of the chuncho type a few times, and the pura beans, and through the sourcing partners, Amazon Specialties, we got the pura and the chuncho, and we just really wanted to showcase the differences in those types of cacao, all at a 73%. So the roasts are slightly different for each of them, but the formulation and the processing is essentially the same all around. And then without making it sound too simplified, the dark milk is a combination of all of those beans turned into a high percentage milk chocolate.
Yeah, I saw that it was a blend of, I assumed it was a blend, but again, I know that Marañón and Cajamarca are related to each other, and so I was able to put, and I know that
exactly right. Yeah, and as we try to put as much detail on our packaging as possible. There's definitely more detail on our website. There's only so much real estate on the package, and we wanted as much of the packaging to show this beautiful new block print style design that we.
Yeah, the standard design is on the packages, which are the background for today's live stream. And as a matter of fact, you told me that you still use this for these standardized, or not these standardized bars, but bars that are more traditional, that this new packaging is aimed more at this new Peru collection. So, when people think about chuncho in general, they talk about a certain kind of fruitiness, I suppose, just in general in terms of the profile. What were your thoughts with the chuncho? Number one is there's a lot of cocoa butter in this. I mean, it is, I would say, more French in terms of its presentation and that style. Fat is all about delivering flavor. And so having a lot of fat is delivering flavor. But it also has this very soft, easy bite, soft melt, right? And chew, which I have to admit is my preference. I mean, I prefer this preference to the much drier, low cocoa butter content of most 2-ingredient bars. But how do you feel about what you were thinking about? So diverse fruit flavors shine through. So yeah. So how long did it take you from the time you started playing with the beans until you thought you had something that you were happy with?
Sorry, I'm tasting that for the first time in
for the first
months
time
now.
or the first time today?
First time in months, probably.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just refreshing my thoughts on it. We had samples of these beans for quite a while, and we had done some smaller test batches, and we talked briefly about scaling up from, say, one a test roast in an oven to a full batch. For us, going from a test batch of finished chocolate in a small mélangeur where we're making maybe 3 or 4 or 5 pounds to a full production batch in one of our McIntyres. Again, we can get sort of an idea or a sense of the direction the chocolate's going, but it's really not until we pull the trigger, push the button to start up that machine and let it run, that we know what it's going to taste like. So we can prepare for everything as much as possible, but it's in the end we just have to trust ourselves when we're doing a full production batch. So we don't really know exactly what it's going to taste like when it comes out, or when we're going to take it out, or what temperatures we're going to run it at. So a lot of that is decided as it's going, and then how the flavor is going to change over time after the batch is done. I believe it was the Pura in this set that we were. I mean, I was pretty unhappy with it when it first came out of the Universal, and there seemed to be this incredible bitterness and astringency that we didn't pick up in the test batches, but that just after aging for a little bit, after coming out of the conch, a lot of that resolved itself, and now I'm like very happy with this.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, it's interesting because we think of, I think of Cacao Gran Blanco, right? It's predominantly white bean. These are going to be almost 100% white. It is probably what we might think of as a Neo Criollo. It's forasteros that went to Mexico and then came back after they were hybridized, rather than naturally occurring populations. But there is a very, very different fruit profile on these than there is in the Chuncho. It's much more prominent up front. It's, in some respects, I think I identify it more as citric rather than fruity, if that makes a whole lot of sense. There's almost a little bit of acetic in it, but not in a negative kind of way. Because I've spent a lot of time, smelling fermentation piles. Sometimes I have very, very positive associations with that as well. But it's not just the sort of muted muted nuttiness that many 100% white bean chocolates come from. And that might be, you said it's a very light roast. And so what you're not doing is you're not converting these chemicals into just plain chocolate notes. It could also be a light fermentation where people aren't fermenting out the chemicals that are associated with fruit and things like that. And also, I mean, it seems like even though they're the same percentage, that there's a slightly different cocoa butter. I mean, it's still a lot of fat in it, so it has that texture associated with it, but it's not quite as forward as the Chuncho is in terms of just how much fat there is in it. But what it does, I mean, I think it's really, really fabulous when one maker is going at multiple sub-origins within the same country, right? And saying, okay, we're going to run the same cocoa percentage, right? and then give you an opportunity to be able to understand some of the differences between these genetics or origins, through the creative lens of a particular maker. I think it's just a really, really fabulous idea. But then, Brian, I got to say that when I think about eating chocolate recreationally, what's that? Oh, you know what? Somebody sent me something. And what I'm going to do is I am going to turn Do Not Disturb on. Something just popped up on my screen. I'm going, what the heck is that? So excuse me, everybody, for that interruption. So I make a distinction between eating chocolate recreationally and eating chocolate professionally. And when I'm eating chocolate recreationally, I am a dark milk fan. I have been a dark milk since I first encountered Andreas Liddy Latte Nero. And I want to say, I don't know, well before 2010. And so the next thing I'm trying is the dark milk. Number one, it's a blend of origins. I'm a huge fan of blending origins. And just, it's the sort of flavor intensity of a dark chocolate with the creaminess of a milk chocolate. Right? Yum. That is luxurious, I think is the way, in terms of the mouthfeel, the luxurious. The milk is there. It's not overpowering. It complements the chocolate. It's not a single flavor. There's some complexity in terms of the way the flavor changes over time in the mouth. It's just, filling in my mouth and filling in my head. So I'm really, 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 really happy to have had an opportunity like that. And, you've had a fascination with milk chocolates from the very beginning, the brown butter milk and other things like that, high cocoa content milks and things like that. I mean, were you growing up, were you more of a dark chocolate kid or a milk chocolate kid? Where do you fall down early on?
As a kid, I was whatever I could get my hands on.
An equal opportunity.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
But yeah, we sell a lot of milk chocolates. I mean, I think we do a good job of making milk chocolates. It's sort of a crowd pleaser. Everybody's familiar with it, and we can sit down and really ponder over some of these like higher percentage darks. But you can also recreationally just enjoy a bar of milk chocolate. And if you want to really analyze it, absolutely. If you want to just sit back and enjoy it, I mean, we have some customers who come into our store and buy a bar of our brown butter milk, and half of it's gone by the time they walk out the door. And
saying they're exercising amazing restraint when they're doing it. But I think, if I can, Brian, I think there's something really, really important there. Is that often craft chocolate makers, specialty chocolate makers, think that anything other than a 2-ingredient chocolate made in a stone grinder, right, is somehow, if you make anything else, you're sort of, compromising your artistic integrity, right? That this is what it is to be a craft chocolate maker. And, I'm going to be talking at Chocoa next month, and we'll talk about growing the craft chocolate market. And, I think that what it is that you're doing, which is, we can't assume that our entire market wants 2-ingredient high cocoa content product. That if what we want to do is we want to be successful as a business, and you need to be successful and sustainable as a business, if what you want to do is you want to be able to honor your commitments to improve the lives and livelihoods of farmers. Because if you go out of business, you can't do that. And by creating, I mean, if I remember properly, and even though I think of this as an adult milk chocolate, it is accessible to children. There are things that you make in your store that, a 9-year-old walk in and, tug at the sleeve of their parent, mommy, daddy, get me that, right? Absolutely. And I think that's something you have to do, right? You can do a lot of this, high cocoa content, 2-ingredient, maybe 3-ingredient chocolates, and where you're focusing on the origin of the beans and things like that. But if that's all you do, I think you make it harder for yourself to have a profitable, sustainable business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The word that you used, accessible. I want our chocolate to be accessible to everybody, both in terms of flavor, or sweetness level, and also pricing. I mean, our chocolate absolutely is expensive, but so it's a luxury, but it's not out of reach necessarily once in a while for somebody to really treat themselves to this. And as far as um, diversity in the product line, and making what people want, and the artistic integrity, and all of that, we make and sell probably twice as much milk chocolate as we do dark, because our customers really like good milk chocolates, and we'll make the absolute best possible milk chocolate we can, if that's what they want.
Oh, I think it's really, really, really important as a lesson that, again, I see a whole lot of sort of dogmatic adherence to a particular method of chocolate making, and to a particular style of chocolate making, and to a particular range of product. And I think that, the 80-20 rule is like 80% of your product should be making you, or 20% of your product should be making 80% of your money. And you want to have things that people are going to walk into your store every week and buy one, right? And come back next week and buy another of the same thing and come back the next week. I mean, trying to build up that kind of repeat traffic is really, really important. And it turns out, and this is, the one thing that really has always frustrated me, as long as puzzled me, is that not all beans deserve to stand alone in a bar of chocolate, right? And so for me, the notion of I am going to reserve I'm going to reserve the single origin 2-ingredient chocolate to something that really deserves, right, that kind of treatment. Whereas and that's going to be where I make my artistic statement. This is who I am as a chocolate maker. And then focus the rest of my time on, listen, if kids like, chocolate covered pretzels, let's put the really, really, really good chocolate on those pretzels is the way to go. Or kids like corn nuts, adults like corn nuts. Let's sell lots of chocolate by putting it around corn nuts, matcha and ginger. I mean, it's like all those really, really wonderful things. There's one thing I want to talk about. We're at the end of the hour. It's just like every one of these things is gone. I want to be respectful of your time. It's a work day. But it's interesting. So here we have a new bar, Dominican Nacional, right? And my understanding, it is in fact Ecuadorian Nacional that was transplanted in the Dominican Republic. Right. Again, this is another nomenclature issue. And many people don't know that most of the ships, if not all of the ships, as they were traveling from the New World back to Spain, waited on anchor off the island of Hispaniola, waiting for the trade winds to go back in the other direction. And so many of the agricultural finds in the New World actually got transplanted in the Dominican Republic, so it's actually one of the highest incidents of biodiversity in cocoa outside of origin, which many people think of could actually be the Cusco Valley, Chuncho in Peru. What's interesting is that Marañón is actually considered to be Peruvian Nacional, right? Which is, it's actually a Forastero, but it is a variety which is unique to Peru. It is related in many respects to an Ecuadorian Nacional, but genetically distinct. And there's in fact a Bolivian Nacional, which is the Cacao Silvestre, which Volker Lehmann put up with Falcon. So, for me, one of the things I love about being able to do a deep dive is, making the connection between the Ecuadorian Nacional in this Dominican bar and the Nacional, which is the Marañón, in this Peruvian bar. Before we go away, what I want to do is let everybody know that this is the Fruition website. You can go there now. You can go shop. They got chocolate. You got the miso. These are the miso maple almonds. Yum. Go for them. I mean, for anybody who hasn't had these brown butter bourbon caramels, yum. I mean, one of the great treats about actually going to visit up in Chocan is sometimes they have seconds of these caramels. And if you're very, very nice, that what you can do is you can get a second of the caramel and do that. I've had this the matcha green tea. I mean, listen, it's hard to know where to stop and where to end. I'm just a huge fan of the work that you've done, and I'm really, really happy to be able to count both you and Dahlia as friends from the very beginning of what it is that you've been doing, and I'm happy that you've been able to join me today. Listen, we have Samir Giha, who's coming in from Peru today, who says he loves your work. Melissa, who was on earlier, says
Sweet.
The passion fruit caramels. I don't know that I've had the passion fruit caramels, but I love maracuja. I love passion fruit as a flavor.
You would like those, I think. Thank you, Melissa, and hi to Samir.
Yeah, he was a guest of mine on the last couple of weeks, so it's been
great.
It's been really, really lovely. Chef Jeffrey Gardner, who's at Marsada Chocolate in Manhattan Beach, California, just outside Los Angeles, says best to Brian. And what I'd like to do is I'd also like to close by saying, here's the Chocolate Life right now. Here's the homepage of the Chocolate Life. Here is Brian. I write a post on every single one of my live streams, and so you can go to this and you can find links to the website. You don't need to write them down. Links to this live stream as it's live and in the future. You can find all this kind of stuff. If I add something, we can do that. You'll find it here. There is also a calendar. So I have every single live stream that I've done is listed in the archive here, as well as all of the upcoming live streams are listed here as well. So if you're interested in tuning in, you'll know what it is that I'm doing. I promote everything that I do here on Instagram, so that's another way to follow me and support what it is that we're doing. And you'll notice that we've got the May all-member newsletter. You see it says members here. I've got a separate browser open, Safari, where I'm not logged in. And you'll notice that if you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, it says the post is for subscribers only. So what you can do is you can click either of the join links. You can join. There's always a free membership tier, but of course, and I know how challenging it can be to send money somebody else's way, but I do enjoy the support for everybody who can become a paying member. There are a couple of tiers, but just becoming a regular member, a free member, doing a like. So if you haven't liked this, you're watching on YouTube, you haven't liked it, please do. And on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn as well. Brian, you've got the next to last comment today. How would you like to end today's live stream?
Oh no, I didn't prepare anything. No, it was genuinely a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah.
It's been way too long, and I can't wait until you hop in the car and drive up to Shokan and visit us again.
I'm looking forward to coming and being the Catskills. Hopefully before the anniversary, which is sometime during fall season, but don't know. Also looking for maybe another overnight and breakfast at the Phoenicia Diner, which is
definitely.
Which is, if you're a chocolate fan, you have never been to the Catskills. Hudson River Valley, whether you only go to Kingston or you're up into Poughkeepsie, all the stuff that's there, crossing over into the west side of the Hudson, visiting Shokan, maybe even getting a glimpse of the Ashokan Reservoir. I mean, I've been up there many times. I don't think I've actually ever through the trees. I've seen the Ashokan Reservoir. I'm beginning to believe it doesn't actually exist, even though people tell me that it does. But yeah, if you're in the area, it's worthwhile getting in a car. It's a beautiful drive. I mean, I head up Route 9 usually on the east side of Hudson, cross over the Kingston River Bridge. If you like to drive, it is a beautiful drive to make, and can't recommend it more highly. Plus, when you get there, right, some brilliant chocolate.
Thank you.
Come up. Genuinely very nice people. So yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind of you, Clay.
It's my pleasure. Right, and which is the perfect out, as I try to end every single one of these broadcasts. If you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until next time, enjoy the day and enjoy the week. Thank you very much, everybody.